The question of what happened to Castlevania is complicated. The easy answer is that Konami doesn't care about the franchise anymore, and I would buy that, but given that they have a hit TV show that's going on 6 seasons, you would think that there would be a new game, and at the time of writing, the last major Castlevania game was in 2014. And in that time, the Metroidvania genre has been thriving, and we even got Metroid back, so why has Castlevania not come back? I do believe that in some ways the indie market has changed how we approach 2D games and their value. This isn't me blaming indie games, but I do think that people now see any type of 2D game as lesser, so they want to pay less for them. The official term for this is called price anchoring. Essentially, consumers use an initial price as a reference point or an anchor and judge future prices relative to that. If the price deviates higher or even lower, it can impact their perception of value. We saw this with the Crash remakes and Crash 4. Despite Crash 4 having more content on offer, the Insane Trilogy gave you 3 games priced for $40. No matter how good Crash 4 was, consumers were anchored to the price of $40. And now that I think about it, it's probably why Capcom hasn't made a new Mega Man game since 11 besides some remasters. They sold Mega Man 11 at $30, and now people are anchored to that price. So if Capcom raises the price on the next game, people are either not going to buy it, or they're going to compulsively look over every inch of the game to see if they added enough content to justify it in their minds. On top of that, a new Castlevania game just has much more competition. As I said before, the indie market is thriving with Metroidvania games, and we even saw this in regards to Metroid Dread. One of the biggest criticisms of that game was, why should I spend $60 on this game that's barely 10 hours long when there's a bunch of other indie games that do a similar thing for more content at a quarter of the price? The only reason Metroid didn't suffer is because it's tied to Nintendo. And that's not a knock at Nintendo, that's actually a testament to how they understand image and consumer trust. Nintendo is the last company that can charge full price for a 2D game because they have an established history of quality games. People like to believe that kind of stuff doesn't matter, but the truth is when your aim is to sell people something, they have to trust that you will do right by them. And honestly, Konami right now really hasn't earned that. And this is actually coincidentally one of the reasons Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown failed. Despite being a good game, Ubisoft has spent the last 2 decades burning any consumer trust they had, so even if they make a good or even great Prince of Persia game, no one has a reason to go out and buy it. But I've only talked about 2D Castlevania games. There's also the 3D games. You could just go mask off and make a 3D game, but you run into the problem Konami has always had with 3D Castlevania games, and that's their lack of a discernible identity. Granted, this doesn't apply to Curse of Darkness or Lament of Innocence, but the other ones, trust me, you're not missing much. Lords of Shadow probably being the most middling with all due respect. And you know, I never really saw the appeal of Lords of Shadow because Lords of Shadow was a clone of classic God of War in a lot of ways, and it came out in 2010, the same year as God of War 3. So why would someone go buy the God of War clone when they should go get God of War? And Lords of Shadow 2 came out 4 years after that game. The old school God of War formula was already getting stale in 2010, and by 2014 it just felt outdated at the time. And I do not have faith that current Konami could ever follow up Lament of Innocence or Curse of Darkness in terms of gameplay. And as much as I hate to say it, the joke about a new Castlevania game being a Souls clone is a very real possibility. I would not be surprised if Konami collabed with FromSoft for it. If you've seen Konami's MO the last couple of gens, it's letting other developers work on their IPs outside of Metal Gear Solid. They've already did it with Castlevania and Silent Hill, so it's not a wild assumption to think they'll do that again, especially given everything with Silent Hill 2 Remake. This next point here is kind of personal for me, but in a way, Castlevania just feels like a finished franchise. One of the reasons Lords of Shadow happened in the first place is because the original Castlevania timeline is done. At the time of writing, there hasn't been a game that takes place after Dawn of Sorrow. That game felt like a bookend to the series, and I can't particularly say there's any missing plot lines to follow up. Granted, there is the Battle of 99 that never got adapted into a game, but that would still only serve as, a midway point, or you're going back to something. It's not continuing the story. If anything, that would be the true send-off for the series. One last battle against Dracula with the last known Belmont, it will be a satisfying ending. But you know what? Forget the old timeline, forget the reboot. Why not make a new game that is tied to the TV show, or remake one of the old games to make those like the TV show? And honestly, that's probably what they're going to do. The only real thing I can imagine that Konami worries about is that audience isn't tested. Castlevania doesn't have the cross-media synergy the way The Last of Us does. One of my favorite Castlevania games is Rondo of Blood, but I can tell you right now, Rondo of Blood is completely different from Castlevania Nocturne. Many people who like that adaptation probably aren't going to go try out that game as it is, and I can't necessarily blame them because outside of Richter being the Belmont, the two have nothing in common. It's why all these remasters of older games aren't making any real headway, because they are Castlevania in its true essence. A serious story of a family of vampire hunters who have a blood feud with Dracula. Sure, there are some moments of levity, but overall these games and even the reboot took itself very seriously. And that's not to say the TV show doesn't take itself seriously, but if you like the camaraderie of Trevor, Sypha, and Alucard, that just doesn't exist in the games. I'm sorry, it just doesn't.
I will find us a covered wagon and horses if you two can manage not to kill each other while I'm gone.
Oh, please. We're not children. He shouldn't die. Yes, fuck you.
And the writing is one of the things that made the TV show gain so much popularity as it did. It currently has 5 seasons. You know how rare it is for anything to have 5 seasons nowadays, especially a show produced on Netflix? The point being that a game made to capitalize off the TV show faces the question on whether or not that audience is going to buy it. And if it's a 2D game, it faces the problems I listed. And if it's a 3D game, same for what I said before. So that's it. That's where I think Castlevania stands. And Konami is probably going to go the remake route. They already did it with Metal Gear. They did it with Silent Hill. It only makes sense they're going to do that with Castlevania. Now, does that remake look like the original Castlevania, or does it look like the TV show? If I had to bet, it's going to look like the TV show. And hey, I'm not saying the TV show is bad. I'm just simply saying be prepared for that. And beyond this, culturally, gaming just feels like it's going through a stagnant period. And I would just like Konami and most of these companies to make a new IP. In regards to Konami, it feels like the last time they made a new IP was Zone of the Enders. I could be wrong, and if I am, you can comment below. And right now, we just need something that's legendary in its own way.